Hey guys! Tonight, we step into a world where torchlight flickers off damp stone walls, and you're elbow-deep in a maze of royal pedigree charts, tracing every twist of the Plantagenet family tree, and you probably won't survive this dot. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the chat so we know who's still awake out there now. Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trace the tangled branches of the Plantagenet dynasty back to Edward III, who reigned with mercurial triumphs from 1327 to 1377. From his 10 children sprouted to rival houses, Lancaster, born of John of Gaunt, and York, courtesy of Edmund of Langley. Each line believes it holds the rightful claim to the throne, like two siblings arguing over an exclusive Instagram filter. The corridors of power feel alive as you gaze at tapestries depicting jousts and coronations, their brocaded silk stiff with centuries of dust. You catch the musty scent of candle smoke and the faint sweat of nervous courtiers. Whispered rumors swirl like the shadows on the wall. Some say an astrologer saw a blood-red moon in June 1452, prophesying civil war. And that rumor alone was enough to send shivers through every knight's chainmail. On one side stands the House of Lancaster, its banner of red rose unfurled by Henry VI, a gentle king prone to bouts of melancholy. On the other, the White Rose of York is championed by Richard, Duke of York, a great-grandson of Edward III, who sharpens his ambition like a sword at dawn. Historians still argue whether these tensions sprang more from dynastic principle or raw personal vendettas. But either way, blood ran cold in every courtly shadow. You run a fingertip along the carved oak of a high-backed chair, still warm, only in your uneasy imagination. It feels absurdly modern to scroll through text messages, but back then, newsletters traveled by horse, and a single misdelivered letter could spark a rebellion. Imagine logging into your favorite app only to discover your clan leader has declared, "You a traitor." No retweets, no do-overs. Yet beneath solemn fealty, alliances shift as fast as a cat on a hot tin roof. The Percys in the north whisper against the Nevilles, and the Nevilles eye York's growing influence. Each feudal lord pads his own coffers, honing loyalties like armor. If you think setting account permissions on Facebook is confusing, try untangling who owes military support to whom in medieval England. It's a 5-dimensional chess game where every pawn might suddenly become a knight. Amid this tangled web, you overhear a fringe tale of a noblewoman who supposedly bathed in crocodile dung to cure rheumatism. Talk about extreme spa day. Such eccentric cures wandered through castle corridors as freely as gossip. You lean closer to a map sprawled across a table, tracing boundaries from London to York. You almost feel the chill of northern winds carving through woolen cloaks, the rattle of messenger pikes tucked into saddles. Each county is a potential powder keg ready to ignite. As night deepens, the hush in the Great Hall seems loaded with anticipation. You can practically hear the distant clang of metal rehearsing the first clash. Soon, these simmering tensions will erupt in hot steel and blood. But for now, you stand at the very edge of history's storm clouds, feeling the static in the air. You ride out before dawn, the mist clinging to your cloak like a clingy ex, and find yourself in the rugged north, where the Neville and Percy names carry more weight than any royal decree. Their feud simmers here in winding lanes and moss-gathered stone walls, and you can almost taste the tension in the damp air like oversteeped tea that's gone bitter. The crux lies in the young. It's Northumberland inheritance. The Percys had fallen on hard times after a mismanaged earldom, and when Henry, Percy, 2nd Earl of Northumberland, died in 1455. The Percy heir, Earl Henry Percy III, still a child. Richard Neville, Earl of Salisbury, stepped in as guardian, supervising the Percy lands and profits. Some say he treated the revenues like a Netflix subscription he refused to cancel. Historians still argue whether Neville genuinely sought to protect Percy's interests, or simply saw an opportunity to swell his own coffers. You trudge along a narrow lane that winds past dairy farms where cows low in the gray light. You catch the faint tang of livestock mingling with peat smoke curling from hearth fires. Local peasants whisper that one Neville Forrester once rode full tilt through a village auction just to steal a barrel of ale-proof. They say that a well-stocked cellar is more prized than any turf war. In 1453, the feud flared when the young Percy heir came of age. Neville refused to hand over control of lands in Wrestle and Topcliffe, claiming Percy's debts required repayment first. Percy's responded by mustering retainers, half-drunks, half-desperate, and confronted Neville's men at Stamford Bridge, but not the famous one where Harold fell in 1066. This was more of a low-budget scuffle in broad daylight, yet it left swords nicked and tempers worse for wear. You stand on a muddy field where footprints sink ankle-deep foot soldiers on both sides had saddled up in neat ranks. But here they slipped and slid, turning the clash into a slapstick routine of flailing pikes and unhorsed knights. At least one squire reportedly slipped on a cowpat, somersaulted into a ditch, and emerged with his codpiece askew like a medieval dad at a backyard barbecue. You can't help but smirk, imagining a group chat among Neville's inner circle. "Hey Richard, does Percy's half-mile wall still stand?" And Percy's retort, "Did your foresters forget to mow the hedges again?" If only they'd had emojis to really drive the point home. Beyond the farce, the stakes were real. Control of Yorkshire's revenues meant funding garrisons and making alliances like choosing your faction in an MMO and hoping your guildmates log in on time. Neville fortified Middleham Castle, painting its towers with his crest. And the Percys responded by burning a few barns outside York. Smoke from those flames drifted into the town, mingling with the scent of freshly baked bread, unsettling the market hawkers. Folks in nearby villages claim they heard ghostly horns at midnight, Percy war horns blown to rally troops, even though no one was there. Some say it was wind whistling through the ruined chapel. Others insist it was the cry of a betrayed ancestor. Quirky local lore spreads faster than plague rumors, and you squint down the lane, half expecting a spectral rider. Meanwhile, the Neville-Percy grudge became fodder for broader politics. Salisbury allied with his brother, Richard Neville, the kingmaker Warwick, who courted Yorkist sympathies. The Percys, wounded in pride and pocket, leaned toward Lancastrian loyalty, hoping Henry VI would grant them redress. Each side whispered in the king's ear, as though he were a reluctant judge in a particularly messy divorce. Historians still argue whether the feud's intensity was born of genuine familial honor or a cynical gambit for regional dominance. You follow a narrow track through scrubland, where the heather blooms in purple patches. The breeze smells faintly of wild thyme and damp wool. As you walk, an old shepherd waves, his sheep trailing behind, and remarks on Neville's diligence in maintaining the forest hunts. Too diligent, he mutters, he's got more traps than an influencer's DM. That line feels modern but nails the essence. Feudal allegiances could be as treacherous as sliding into the wrong person's messages. Neville's retainers, dressed in green and gold, patrolled the roads with hawks on their wrists, while Percy devotees in crimson cloaks skulked through the hedgerows, ready to ambush any lone courier. You almost imagine a medieval stunt show. It's complete with archers firing at chickens for target practice. Cruel, yes, but a handy skill when war arrives. Amid these scuffles and rumors, a fringe tidbit surfaces. A local scholar claimed that a secret truce was once sealed with honey meads shared from a silver cup dipped in serpent's venom, thought to bind any oath stronger than iron chains. Whether true or just tavern gossip, it captures the sense that loyalties here were as fluid as the mead in the black pots warming over hearths. You press on to the edge of Neville's forest, where ancient oaks bow over the path, their branches whispering like advisors plotting behind closed doors. You can almost hear the rustle of cloaks, the hushed exchange of coins between a Neville squire and a Percy spy. Somewhere in that shadow play, grander conflicts seed themselves, ready to sprout into full-blown civil war as you pause at the forest's mouth. A raven caws overhead, a grim reminder that these local sparks, though small, could soon engulf the whole kingdom in flame. You brush bark from your sleeve, feeling its rough texture. Sense the weight of these rivalries pressing on every county hall and great house. What begins as a private quarrel over land and loyalty here will soon echo in the gilded chambers of Westminster. Down in the village below, the smell of baking oat cakes drifts upward, grounding you in daily life before the storm. You savor that homely aroma, knowing it won't last once raised banners sweep across the north. But for this moment, you stand on contested ground where seeds of rivalry crack the earth, and one day, those roots will pry open the gates to wider war. You break camp before first light, the northern frost still clinging to your cloak's hem as you trudge south toward St. Albans. Dew glistens on every blade of grass like scattered diamonds, and the hush of dawn feels thick enough to hold your breath. Ahead, the city walls rise in pale stone, weathered by centuries of pilgrims seeking sanctuary. You can almost taste the anticipation sharp as the tang of cold iron, knowing this sleepy market town is about to become the tinder for a far greater blaze. Banners snap in the breeze as you pass through the outskirts, the red rose of Lancaster fluttering alongside the royal white ensign, while not far off, York's white rose and blue lion standard stand at attention like tagged contestants in an otherworldly duel. Villagers pause in their chores to stare, mouths stuffed with half-chewed oatcakes, debating whose banner will trail in mud first. Historians still argue whether the soldiers marching in under York's colors were driven by genuine loyalty to the Duke or simply drawn by the promise of looted cartloads of grain. Either way, you sense the air crackling with promises of violence. You duck into a narrow lane paved with cobblestones, worn smooth by cartwheels. The pungent stench of manure mingles with horse sweat and wet wool, and every hoofbeat echoes like a threat. A Yorkist archer adjusts the wax in his mustache. Proper grooming was as vital then as Snapchat filters are now. You resist a laugh, imagining the same fellow struggling to get chainmail off after a sweaty summer joust, like wrestling into a clingy wetsuit without a zipper, as dawn's pink glow bleeds into the sky. Yorkist captains rendezvous beneath the looming Archbishop's palace. You slip through a side gate and glimpse Richard, Duke of York, conferring with his eldest son, Edward. They hunch over a tattered map spread across a battered wooden table. Nearby, Warwick the Kingmaker sharpens his sword so methodically it could double as a barbershop mirror. Across the way, Lancastrian nobles, led by the Earl of Northumberland, muster their men in the market square, the ground churning beneath dozens of armored feet. Rumor has it that on the eve of battle, a phantom courier galloped into the town, wearing a lantern helmet and bearing a letter proclaiming the whole affair a test of England's faith. Some claim it was sorcery. Others think a Yorkist prankster in borrowed mail. Quirky folklore aside, the real signal arrives at sunrise when a lone trumpet blast shatters the morning calm, setting both camps stretching for weapons as if waking from the dullest nightmare imaginable. On May 22nd, 1455. The date burned into every chronicler's ledger. York's forces advanced through the abbey's southern gate, catching Lancastrian defenders off guard. You slip behind a half-collapsed wall and watch as swords and bills flash in shafts of morning light. The narrow streets funnel combat into choke points, turning the brawl into a brutal melee more reminiscent of overstuffed subway cars at rush hour than a cleanly pitched battle. You hear the clash of steel ricocheting off shields, each ring a furious punctuation mark to the hushed prayers drifting up from the abbey's cloisters. Sweat slicks your brow as you duck behind a broken cart, the smell of blood coppery in the air, so thick you could almost spread it on toast. A nearby squire stumbles over discarded harness straps and lets out a yelp worthy of a startled raccoon. Then scrambles upright, hurriedly retying his greaves. By midday, the Lancastrians crumble. Casualty estimates hover around 1,000, dead grim numbers for a first skirmish equal to wiping out entire battalions in a single afternoon. You eye the fallen with uneasy fascination, noting how some noble knights still clutch their rosaries, as if faith alone might shield them from halberd blows. Lord Clifford, that Lancastrian stalwart from the north you barely glimpsed back in Neville's woods, falls to an arrow loosed by a Yorkist marksman hiding in a manor tower. His death severs one of Lancaster's staunchest pillars, tipping the scales decisively. You can't help but glimpse the oddity. His gauntlet, emblazoned with a white heart, lies twisted in the straw, while a caged magpie screeches overhead, as if mocking the doomed Earl's once proud crest. Amid the chaos, a fringe claim surfaces that the Yorkists were aided by a mysterious herbalist who laced Lancastrian ale with soporific poppy extract. Some villagers still swear they saw half the defenders nodding off mid-charge, whether true or tavern tall tale. It underscores that victory often hinges on the strangest margins. Historians still argue whether St. Albans truly marked a decisive turning point or merely ignited what was already inevitable, a feud that would have burst into flame sooner or later. What's undeniable is the spectacle of capturing King Henry VI himself, led out of the abbey like a dazed prisoner at a medieval cosplay convention. You nearly chuckle at the absurdity, a bespectacled king being shepherded by bearded men in chainmail, none of them stopping to update their status on parchment scrolls by day's end. York's banner flutters over the town, plastered on every gateway like a selfie of victory. The Lancastrians lick their wounds in makeshift camps, nursing broken bones and bruised egos. You wander amidst overturned chamber pots and scattered manuscripts, marveling at how quickly order unravels when banners drop. You brush dirt from your hands, feeling the grit beneath your nails, like a reminder that history often blooms from small missteps and unpaid debt here. A refused summons there. Remember those damp woods where Neville and Percy tangled? Their squabble was but one spark among many, but here at St. Albans, the tinder catches fire. You taste the acrid smoke of torches being lit for celebratory vigils, though the cheers from York's ranks ring hollow against the hush of ruined stalls as night falls and torches gutter in the town square. You sense that this first salvo has shattered more than just peace. It has transformed warfare itself into a spectacle of shifting loyalties and unpredictable carnage. Tomorrow, both sides will lick their wounds, count their dead, and plot anew. But tonight, you stand amid broken shields and torn banners, feeling the thrill and dread of knowing the war has officially begun. You slip through the grand doors of Westminster's painted chamber, the scent of beeswax and aged oak wrapping around you like a velvet cloak, and feel the tension in the air like static before a storm. At the heart of this sumptuous chaos sits King Henry VI, his pale face half hidden behind embroidered drapes. You can almost see the flicker of candlelight reflecting off his vacant stare. He's a devout man, prone to prayer and poetry, yet his throne feels less like power and more like a porcelain doll teetering on a narrow pedestal one. Wrong move, and he'll shatter. Court life buzzes around him. Noble women giggling by tapestry frames as if they're judging the latest gossip runway. You inhale the faint aroma of lavender sachets tucked into velvet sleeves, mingling with the musk of fur-lined robes. Despite the opulence, a nervous energy crackles like logging into a group chat only to discover a debate about your loyalty has already exploded. Henry's advisors flit about, whispering fervently. His cousin, the Duke of Suffolk, leans in with honeyed words, promising stability, while the Bishop of Winchester counters with stern warnings of divine displeasure. Historians still argue whether the bishop's concerns were pious conviction or a bid for political influence. You edge closer, listening for the brittle crack in Henry's composure. He murmurs fragments of scripture, fingers tracing the golden, fleur-de-lis on his prayer book, and you notice his trembling hands. It's said that in 1453 he fell into a catatonic state, unable to recognize courtiers he'd known for years. Fact that sent shivers through England's nobility and plunged the realm into uncertainty. Kings, after all, are meant to lead. A king who forgets his crown is about as reassuring as a GPS glitching mid-journey. Nearby, a court jester in motley trundles toward the dais, balancing a wooden staff topped with a carved fox's head. He bows so deeply his bells tinkle like distant church bells, then offers the king a bejeweled goblet of rosewater. Bright rubies wink in the candlelight as if urging Henry to take solace in something more solid than his thoughts. You grin at the absurdity. Who needs TikTok dancers when you've got a guy in tights juggling moral advice and rubber chickens? Behind a crimson velvet screen, you overhear a fringe rumor that Henry's melancholy cure involved bathing in powdered pearls mixed with crushed locust shells, said to sharpen the mind as finely as a new dagger blade. Whether that's medieval madness or an elite beauty regimen is anyone's guess. But you can't help picturing the king squinting at a mirror, wishing for a modern moisturizer, as Henry rouses. His courtiers jockey for position, each hoping to be the first to whisper sweet solutions in his ear. The Duke of York, seated in the shadow of a pillar, watches with polite restraint. His gaze flicks to the crown atop the high altar, polished so brightly that it glares like a spotlight on a stage. York's ambition simmers. He's convinced the king's fragility justifies a regency. After all, a king who can't govern is little more than a decorative statue placed on Parliament's mantelpiece. You join a cluster of attendants near the carved fireplace, where logs crackle and sputter, sparks that drift upward like tiny shooting stars. A lady-in-waiting adjusts her beaded necklace, casting furtive glances at the king and sliding her friend a write-up of the latest pamphlet denouncing York's overweening pride. She hisses that the pamphlet was printed on Sussex hemp paper, a scandalous expense for mere polemic. You stifle a snort. Printed leaflets are the 15th century equivalent of rage tweets, minus the HASHTAGS. In a quiet corner, the Earl of Somerset confers with Margaret of Anjou, Henry's fierce queen, who arrived in England bearing French poise and a steel-spiked purse. You can practically hear the jingle of her coin pouch as she promises Somerset lands if he secures the king's favor. Her eyes glint like polished jet in the dim light, and you admire how she balances regal composure with the hunger of a chess grandmaster plotting for moves ahead. Historians still argue whether Margaret's political savvy was decisive in rallying Lancastrian loyalty or whether her fiery temper merely fueled further court friction. You drift closer to the dais where Henry shuffles his feet on a richly woven carpet, the threads whispering like audience applause waiting to erupt. He opens his mouth to speak, but falters. Voice cracking like a novice minstrel, forgetting lyrics, mid-verse, a hush falls. Courtiers lean forward, nodding as if affirming their own loyalty with vigorous bobbing and involuntary parliamentary headbang. You spot the Bishop of Durham discreetly passing the king a small vial of saffron tincture, rumored to ease melancholy. You'd Instagram that if you could. The conversation shifts to finance. War costs in France have drained the treasury, and Parliament's coffers gape like an unpaid tab at a tavern. Somerset argues for increased taxation on wool exports, prompting a murmur among the merchants lurking behind columns. Someone jokes that if they taxed the king's prayers, the crown might be solvent again. You laugh softly, picturing a medieval Kickstarter campaign dubbed Crowns for Henry. Fund the faith. Suddenly, a young squire with sweat-damp hair and ink-stained hands approaches, bearing a petition from York's supporters, calling for a council of peers to govern in the king's stead. He bows so deeply, you hear the swoosh of velvet. Margaret's eyes flash. She strides forward, skirts swirling like war banners, and denounces the petition as treasonous proof that York aims to usurp the throne. A hush follows her outburst, as if everyone inhaled at once and can't exhale. You lean against a marble column, the stone cool beneath your fingertips. The flicker of torchlight casts long shadows across intricate floor tiles, echoing the fractured loyalties at play. The king blinks, as if waking from a dream, and Henry VI's fragile voice whispers, "Peace must reign." It's enough to send courtiers scurrying to their feet in applause, each hoping to bask in reflected grace. Yet you sense the veneer of calm cracking. Already tensions like these don't dissipate with polite clapping as you slip away from the chamber. You brush past a tapestry depicting Henry V's triumph at Agincourt, arrows raining like metal hail. The contrast strikes you. A grandfather revered for martial glory, and a grandson revered for piety, but plagued by fragility. You catch your breath, feeling the room's weight, how a single royal mind's tremor can tip the balance of a kingdom. Outside, the chill air feels like an exhale from a world holding its breath. Courtiers fan out like impatient bees, each determined to shape the next move. You pause by the River Thames, the water rippling in dark waves, reflecting torchlight like scattered jewels. You dip your fingers in, tasting the cold current fresh, unfiltered, and oblivious to human squabbles. It's a reminder that life flows on, regardless of who sits on a shaky throne. You step back into the murmur of the court, ready to follow where intrigue leads next. For in this realm of candlelit shadows and whispered schemes, it isn't steel that decides outcomes, but the fragility of one man's mind and the willingness of many to bend his will. You slip back into the hushed corridors of Westminster, the echoes of St. Albans still humming in the stones, and trace Richard, Duke of York, as he moves through candlelit anterooms like a strategist plotting his next play. He's riding high, on the momentum of that victory, pushing Henry VI's kingmakers aside and installing his own confidants in the royal council. You can practically feel the thrum of ambition radiating off his dark velvet doublet. So quiet and controlled that you almost miss it until it crashes through the chamber doors like a war drum. Richard strides into Parliament in early November 1455, his gauntleted hand brushing aside the crimson curtain with casual authority. When he takes his seat at the Lord Protector's dais en office he first held during deceased Henry's breakdown in October 1453, drifts from the hearth like a blessing. He's officially the kingdom's guardian again, and his supporters crowd the benches, whispering oaths and clinking goblets hidden under desks. A mainstream fact. During his first protectorate, Richard had overseen judicial reforms and curbed corrupt tax collectors, winning him grudging respect among commoners and lords alike. The hush breaks as York calls for the arrest of Edmund Beaufort, Duke of Somerset, and the disposal of his Lancastrian favorites. You watch Somerset's face blanch under the flicker of torchlight, his powdered hair catching the glow like spun silver. The chamber erupts in a flurry of petitions and protests, banners waving in the gallery like defiant flags in a gale. He marshals his authority with such calm that it's like watching a master chess player sacrifice a rook. The board trembles in response. Yet behind the solemn proceedings, you catch trivial details that feel oddly modern. York refuses to set foot in any council meeting afternoon, insisting on his daily power nap, custom so peculiar that gossip spreads of him napping under his own desk, sandals still on his feet. Fringe rumors claim he carried a brass hand glass. Pocket sundial everywhere, calibrating his rest to the exact moment of the sun's zenith. You picture him squinting at the tiny gnomon, whispering, "Not now, my schedule is sacred." Historians still argue whether York sincerely sought only the kingdom's reform or secretly plotted to seize the crown itself. You lean forward, tasting the parchment-scented air, wondering if his calm demeanor masks a man ready to snatch the diadem at the slightest slip. The Queen's French chambermaids whisper that Margaret of Anjou wept into her velvet slippers when she learned of Somerset's fall, swearing vengeance with each tear. Just beyond the great oak doors, you slip into the courtyard where York's retainers gather beneath banners of white rose on green field. They're hushed, their eyes bright with purpose. You note one archer sharpening arrows carved with tiny roses, each fletched feather dipped in gold pant, a quirky flourish that makes you smirk. Imagine the group chat if they'd messaged that, you mutter to yourself, picturing a squire sending a boomerang of a gilded arrow in medieval Snapchat. In the weeks that follow, York crisscrosses the kingdom, dining in great houses that had once ignored him. He feasts at Middleham, where he once fortified his northern stronghold, and knights men in sparking ceremonies fit for cinema. His son, Edward, stoic and determined, carries York's banner at each event, drawing crowds who cheer as though he were a rock star's understudy. You nearly laugh aloud, think of hiring an entourage just to boost your Instagram clout. Kent, you've captured this scene. Yet every triumph is shadowed by Lancastrian counterblasts. Royal writs roll out condemning York's appointments as overreaching, while Margaret's agents slip into taverns, handing out embossed leaflets denouncing York's arrogant usurpation. One eccentric handbill claims he's discovered a black cat that predicts battle outcomes, earning him the nickname Duke of Witchcraft. True or not, it underscores the belief that York's ascendancy isn't just political, but laced with superstition. You skirt past a fringe account of a secret midnight council in which York's advisors swore their swords on a brooch from Eleanor of Aquitaine, supposedly granting them victory in any fray. Whether that oath held power or was merely a dramatic flourish, no one's certain. What matters is the image, a Duke of York forging bonds stronger than iron. Then comes a moment that crystallizes his rise. In midsummer, a caravan of royal tax collectors, long overdue on payments, arrive in York's stronghold demanding tithes. Under his watchful eye, the collectors are outmaneuvered. York personally oversees the adjustment of debts, pardoning smallholders who can't pay and redirecting funds to troops loyal to him. The local miller, who'd refused composition fees, is instead granted the right to brew ale for York's soldiers a minor. It's a concession that wins hearts faster than any decree from Whitehall. You feel that shift. Loyalty no longer flowed from ancient oath alone, but from tangible benefits, the miller's free ale, the archer's golden-fletched bolts, the squire's midday naps. York's ascendancy is not just carved by blade, but by a careful cultivation of goodwill and spectacle. By autumn, you join a gathering in Leicester, where York calls a council of northern lords. They meet beneath a canopy of scarlet cloth, quills, poised over fresh vellum. You scribble in the margin of your own mental ledger. Richard demands recognition. As Henry's heir should the king fail to produce a male issue, the room hums with tension as lords eye one another's jeweled rings, each calculating whether to sign or face York's disfavor. A mock jurist in the corner argues that signing such a petition is tantamount to proclaiming York as king, in all but name. Another dismisses it as mere housekeeping, though everyone knows property disputes start with such fine print. You catch York's steady gaze on the paper, his lips curling in a faint, secretive smile, and sense that he's playing a longer game. Night falls and torches flare beyond the windows, casting dancing shadows on polished floors. You watch York retire to his solar chamber, where tapestries of his ancestors Thomas of Woodstock, Edward III, and others loom over his embroidered bed. He unmasks a small brass-bound chest on his bedside table, opens it, and withdraws a handful of peculiar tokens, a carved yew arrow, a tiny vial of stirred lake paint, and a folded scrap of paper inscribed with a prophecy in Norman French. Some say he reads these omens by candlelight to chart his next move. Others call it mere superstition. Regardless, you sense that every element, the sword, the scroll, a sundial, feeds into his growing legend as you close your eyes that night. In a nearby hostelry, you can still hear the muzzled clank of York's retinue marching home, their banners rustling like whispered promises. You drift to sleep, picturing York's star rising above Whitehall. His ascendancy, a tapestry woven of political savvy, personal magnetism, and just a dash of theatrical flair. And all the while, the realm edges closer to the tipping point, where reform becomes revolution and York stands center stage, ready to claim a destiny he insists is his by blood, by right, and perhaps by a prophecy or two. You slip into the great hall at Windsor Castle, where the rafters echo with laughter and the long oaken tables groan under roasted boar, spiced wine, and platters of sugar-glazed figs, so heady you can almost taste the Northumbrian heather in each gilded goblet. At the dais, Edmund Beaufort, Duke of Somerset, presides over this lavish feast like the ringmaster of a medieval circus. His velvet surcoat trimmed with ermine catching torchlight in soft glints. The Beauforts weren't always so regal. Remember, they sprang from John of Gaunt's liaison with Catherine Swynford bastards. Legitimated by royal decree in 1397, but explicitly barred from succession by Henry IV. Seeing Edmund hosting feasts fit for princes is proof that yesterday's bastard can become today's power broker. Historians still argue whether that original stain on their lineage fueled Somerset's ambition or simply drove him to overcompensate. You lean forward, inhaling the sweet smoke of burning juniper and oak, and notice Somerset greeting each guest. By name Perkin Warbeck's distant cousin, a fringe theory insists he haunted these halls, and Lady Margaret Beaufort, his cousin twice removed, who murmurs about her son's unknown destiny. You almost expect medieval small talk to mention the weather, but instead, it's all alliances. Every handshake seals a promise of troops, a coin or castle gates flung open. In December 1453, Somerset cemented one of his boldest alliances by marrying Eleanor Beauchamp, sister of the Earl of Warwick, an unexpected match that sent ripples through every courtly grapevine. Her previous marriages to the Earl of Rutland and then the Duke of Gloucester had ended in scandal. One husband severed in battle, the other poisoned in some rumors by a poisoned clasp on her sleeve. That's black legend or reality. It added a dizzying subplot to their union as servants refill tankards, You catch a stray note of minstrels playing a tangle-like melody on lutes oddly prescient, as if they foresaw modern dance crazes. You fight a smile at the image of knights in full harness trying the Beaufort boogie. One of Somerset's young squires actually attempts a stiff jig near the hearth and snags his heel on the dais steps, tumbling into a tub of apples like a very unceremonious cider press. Yet the sumptuous trappings belie a tangled web of loyalties. Somerset has quietly betrothed his eldest son Henry to a Warwickshire heiress, while promising his second son John a rich dowry from a Percy bride. Through these calculated marriages, he hopes to encircle Yorkist territory like a tight-knit patchwork. Quilt and maybe suffocate their independence with polite requests for hospitality. Historians still argue whether these unions were sincere bonds of kinship or cynical land grab. Maneuvers designed to choke York's flank, your fingertips brush the embroidered hem of the tablecloth silk imported from Ghent. They boast and you imagine the price paid in Flemish groats. A fringed tale swirls that Eleanor Beauchamp once flung a cup of saffron-steeped mead at a suitor who insulted her crest, staining his tunic a brilliant yellow, an alchemist's prank or genuine rage. No one's certain. The scent of rosemary and burnt sugar fills your nostrils as a young herald steps forward to read aloud a new treaty. Somerset agrees to support the Nevilles in their northern disputes in exchange for safe passage through Neville-held castles. You hear murmurs that this treaty was drafted under a yew tree, said to whisper secrets to those who sleep beneath it, and that the ink used was mixed with crushed unicorn horn powder for binding power. It's totally fringe, but it captures your imagination. Meanwhile, behind the tapestries, you glimpse Henry VI's French queen, Margaret of Anjou, standing with Somerset to the side. She tastes the edge of a wineglass, nods with approval at Eleanor's gown, and then directs Somerset's valet to deliver a private note likely charting her next political gambit. You wonder if the Duke drinks from that same goblet between courses. Conversations swirl. Some lords joke that a man rushed into war without an alliance is like someone logging into Twitter without two-factor authentication to get hacked. Others grumble that Somerset's network of in-laws now outnumbers Henry's own relatives and speculate whether the Lancastrian king feels more boxed in than a viral influencer facing cancel culture. As the roast boar's crackling fades, a hush falls. Somerset rises, his voice calm yet resonant, to propose a toast to unity in blood and purpose. Tankards clank. You note the glint in his eye, equal parts warmth and steel. Then he leans close to Eleanor, whispers something, and she tilts her head, laughter dancing across her lips. You catch only York will rue the day before they turn back to the crowd. Suddenly, Cage stumbles in with a missive from Calais. Yorkist forces have seized a strategic town, flouting Somerset's new Neville ties. A ripple of tension cuts through the hall as lords press elbows for a better view of the letter's seal. Somerset's jaw tightens. He paces before the dais, boots thudding like a heartbeat. You swallow a mouthful of toasted almonds and fan yourself between the heat of the torches and the intensity of alliances shifting beneath your feet. You feel like a spectator at a gladiator match rulebook negotiation. Outside, the night breeze carries the distant toll of cathedral bells. Some say they lament the coming bloodshed, others believe they mark triumph. A fringe account tells of a phantom banquet held in the chapel after midnight, tended only by shadows and candle moths, where deals were supposedly struck in whispered Latin. Whether that's spiritual or spectral intrigue is anyone's guess. As the feast ends, Somerset escorts guests toward the courtyard. Each departure laced with promises. Your banners will fly next to mine. Call on me if York invades your lands. Remember our bond before God and ledger. You feel the weight of those words bundled like knotty ropes ready to tighten around shifting loyalties. You step into the cool night air. the earthen scent of frost-tinged grass greeting your senses, and realize that Somerset's marriage policies have spun an intricate web as beautiful and as deadly as the finest tapestry. He's woven bastards, dukes, and dowries into a single enterprise of power. All under the guise of convivial feasting, with the feast's embers still glowing behind you. You understand that alliances forged at these tables can ignite wars just as swiftly as any sword. And as you trudge back to your chamber, you can't help but wonder which of these newly crafted bonds will fray first. Unraveling the delicate piece Somerset labored to sew. You trudge across fields blanketed in white, each step crunching like broken sugar under your boots, and feel the bitter wind slice through your woolen cloak. Ahead, the Vale of Wakefield stretches, a hushed amphitheater of skeletal trees dripping. Icicles. Smoke still curls from farmhouse chimneys, mingling with the promise of violence like the scent of burned cedar and fear. You sense that this sleepy Yorkshire lane, dusted in frost, is about to become the stage for one of the war's most brutal surprises. In early December 1460, Richard, Duke of York, his son Edmund, Earl of Rutland, and his powerful ally, the Earl of Salisbury, marched south after securing strongholds in northern England. You recall the echo of York's confident proclamations in Parliament. He claimed the crown by right and planned to greet Henry VI at London's gates. But here, amid these silent hedgerows, destiny takes a wicked turn. Historians still argue whether York underestimated the Lancastrian forces or simply trusted bad intelligence. But either way, he's walking into an ambush, the Lancastrian army. Led by Margaret of Anjou's fierce lieutenant Lord Clifford, and aided by nephew Henry Beaufort, conceals itself behind snow-laden hedgerows. You crouch behind a fallen branch and watch as half-frozen soldiers pull heavy cloaks tighter, their breath puffing like ghosts. A crimson pennon flutters too bright against the gray sky, like spilled wine on new snow. Their attack with a roar that shatters the hush, arrows raining down as if the sky itself has turned traitor. You flinch as York's forces scramble. Banners caught on fence posts and horses slipping in the icy mud. You see Salisbury's knights form a desperate shield wall, their armor clanking in a frantic rhythm, but they can't hold every flank. A stray arrow nicks the Earl of Rutland's helm, his youthful face slipping behind the visor in a flicker of panic and pain before he staggers to the ground. You taste the coppery tang of fear as you press your gloved hand over your heart. Up ahead, York himself rides out to rally his men. His velvet-lined helm is crowned by a white rose carved in silver, now flecked with snow. He spurs his horse forward, voice booming over the clash, "Hold fast, for England." But his cry is swallowed by steel on steel and the low groans of wounded men. You glimpse Sir John Neville Salisbury's son cutting a path through Lancastrian lines, his sword arcing like a sculpted steel scythe, yet even his valor can't stem the tide. The ground trembles as cavalry sweeps in from the flanks. Horses bellow, their frozen breath a misty veil. Lancastrian bills hook galloping riders from their saddles. York's longbowmen fire blindly into the dusk. You swallow against the cold, knot in your throat, remembering the laughter at Somerset's banquet, where one squire face planted into apples. Here, there's no humor, just the groans of dying men and the unrelenting crunch of boots on shattered ice. Amid the turmoil, a fringed tale stirs. Some villagers swear they saw a spectral knight ride through the trees, his armor aglow with moonlight, warning York of treachery. They call him the White Rider, a local legend whispered since the days of the Black Prince. True or not, the image haunts you on omen overlooked until dawn's light reveals the carnage. York's standard-bearer falls next to you, banner dragging through the slush. You reach to steady him, fingertips brushing the silk embroidered with a white rose, now scarred with blood. He gasps, tell my sister, I fought. As I swore, and then his lifeblood seeps into the snow. You lock eyes with him for a heartbeat so fleeting and wonder if he ever updated his last wishes on parchment scrolls. Above the fray, Salisbury charges toward a gap in the Lancastrian lines, his helm catching the pale sun like a beacon. You feel a surge of hope until a crash rings out. His horse stumbles into a frozen ditch. You sprint forward, heart pounding, to find him dismounted, blade raised in defiance, but outmatched by sheer numbers. A billhook cleaves through plate, and he staggers, pupils widening in shock. The Earl falls, prayers tumbling from his lips, in an undecipherable litany. Around you, Yorkist morale fractures like thin ice under weight suddenly. Lord Clifford appears, brandishing the severed head of the Earl of Rutland, cold witness to youthful valor wasted. He hoists it by its hair, shouting, "This is for your father." The sight is so grotesque, so medieval in its cruelty, that you shudder. Yet you can't look away history's darkest theater unfolding in real time. You swallow past bile, remembering the gentle court of Henry VI, and taste irony's acrid sting. As dusk falls, the battlefield turns to a frozen sprawl of bodies. Horses nick at carcasses for warmth. Wolves might sift through the wreckage by morning. You stumble through the white field, slipping on blood-hardened ice, each step a reminder of how swiftly victory flips to disaster. You duck under a fallen pike and brush frost from a knight's visor, his features eerily serene in death like the portrait of a saint. You wonder if he believed in those unicorn horn treaties, if he thought them bulletproof. Historians still argue whether York's decision to engage in these narrow lanes was tactical genius or fatal hubris. And the debate rages among scholars like wind through the oaks. You feel the weight of that uncertainty, the reminder that history is written not just by winners, but by those who survive to tell the tale. You reach a cluster of campfires, their embers twisting skyward. Lancastrian soldiers huddle around them, licking wounds and counting scalps. One grizzled veteran twirls a captured Yorkist halberd, joking that next time he'll store it under his bed as a souvenir. You manage a weak chuckle before coughing frostbite creeping into your fingers. Hey, fringe story climbs your mind. An old crone from the nearby hamlet claimed that before the battle, she saw Margaret of Anjou drowning her gloves in a lake of rose water and praying to St. George for vengeance. Some dismiss it as village superstition. Yet the Queen's fury on the field feels as real as a war banner snapping overhead. Night deepens and the cold bites through everything. You huddle by a dying fire, watching the flicker touch frozen faces. You think of York's son Richard, Earl of Rutland, and Salisbury, both lost in hours so quickly that England's political landscape tilts on its axis. The white rose of York lies trampled, dew mingling with blood, while red Lancastrian banners drape spiked pikes like gruesome trophies. You rise, brushing ice from your cloak, head throbbing with the roar of battle. You navigate through frozen hedges, battered standards, and abandoned elbow guards until you reach a path lit by torchlight. Each torch flickers against the dark, as though England itself burns with grief and wrath. As you follow the haunting glow, you remember that earlier feud in Neville's Forest, that first clash at St. Albans, and Henry VI's trembling. Now, those seeds have sprouted through Wakefield's frozen soil, sending shockwaves through every courtly chamber. You feel the history in your bones, how one ambush carved a wound so deep that the war's shape changed forever. You pause at the valley's edge, turning to gaze back at the field. The moon peeks through drifting clouds, illuminating the frozen carnage in a spectral glare. You shiver despite your layers, as if the night itself whispers that no one walks unscathed through. Civil War. You trudge through ankle-deep snow, each crunch echoing like a drum roll for chaos. and find yourself on Marston Moor's northerly cousin, the fields of Toten. Snow whips your face like misplaced icicles, stinging your cheeks with a sharp reminder that nature's fury is as merciless as any sword. Ahead, the armies of York and Lancaster stretch in endless lines, banners snapping in the wind-red roses and white, emblazoned on cloth so frost-laden they look like sugar-dusted pastries gone rancid. You can almost taste the iron in the air, mixed with the bite of sleet and sweat. On March 29, 1461, Toten becomes England's single largest and bloodiest pitched battle, with contemporary sources claiming upwards of 28,000 men engaged and maybe 7,000 dead by day's end, a staggering carnage that reshapes the kingdom overnight. Historians still argue whether those casualty figures were inflated by Lancastrian chroniclers to evoke pity or gilded by Yorkists desperate to showcase their triumph. Either way, you sense the ground itself groans beneath the weight of so much death as you weave through frozen clods. And the occasional helmet half buried in drifts, you spot a Yorkist prelate blessing the dead and dying, tears freezing on his beard. You lean in, catching a whispered prayer in hoc signo vinces, an echo of Constantinian lore. Almost as if he's telling those who fall that their sacrifice mirrors Rome's conversion. You shudder, picturing the same invocation dropping into your group chat as a triumphant meme. Nearby, you glimpse the kingmaker, Warwick, astride a massive destrier, his blue and gold shield pieced with arrow dents. He scans the horizon like a hawk noting prey, his face a mask of cold resolve. Remember that glittering, arrow-fletched trophy you saw at York's gatherings? Warwick's personal quiver holds darts dipped in bone-bleach dye supposedly to blind enemies mid-skirmish. Fringe accounts claim he once tested them on an ill-fated pigeon, which returned with a single white feather pinned to its back as an ominous callback to the white rose he bears. Behind you, Lancastrian archers huddle in pits they've dug into the frosted earth, their bows creaking under tension. You duck instinctively as a flurry of arrows bursts overhead, quiver-launched bolt whistles like a bad text notification before embedding itself in frozen turf. You wince at the metallic thwack, every shot a wordless curse. Somewhere in the pale distance, the Nevilles and Percy, still the old rivals, stand shoulder, their ancient grudges paused by the promise of royal favor. It's ironic. Those two families who skirmished over forest rights at Stamford Bridge are now united in mutual slaughter. Snow blurs the lines between friend and foe, turning the clash into a swirling canvas of steel and scarlet. You slip behind a fallen banner, its painted rose, half concealed in snow, and press your fingertips to your lips to catch your breath. The clash of Pollux rings like a macabre xylophone, punctuated by soldierly yells and the distant groans of the wounded. One knight near you loses his footing and executes an unplanned somersault, crashing into a heap of pikes, helmet flying off to reveal a shock of ginger hair that looks almost festive in this sea of despair. You can't help but stifle a snort. High-pitched trumpets signal Yorkist cavalry charges. Horses rear in futile defiance of slush, their hooves carving furrows as they barrel toward Lancastrian lines. You feel the tremor under your boots as hoofbeats thunder by a medieval tank division more terrifying than any modern war machine. A Yorkist knight in borrowed plate catches your eye, flashing you a grin lopsided by fear. You nod through your scarf, offering silent solidarity before he lunges forward. Lance leveled like a broken GPS, guiding him straight into death. On the Lancastrian flank, Lord Clifford stakes his banner on a knoll, shouting for all to hear. Now, we pay the Yorkists in kind. His rallying cry resonates off the stone-cold horizon. And you note the irony. This is the same Clifford, whose grisly decapitation of Rutland at Wakefield you witnessed in bronze-molded horror. Here he stands, the architect of so much blood, this winter's butcher, amid the maelstrom. A fringe tale surfaces. Villagers swear they saw a merchant horse slip off its rider moments before battle. Neighing so mournfully, it summoned wolves from miles away. Some claim packs circled the camp, picking at bodies under the cloak of night. Whether true or tavern hyperbole, it underscores the sense that human conflict invites primal scavengers. Nature's own claimed tickets for the fallen. You follow Warwick as he gallops past a tangled line of pikes, his throat closing against icy wind. He pauses by an overturned cart of provisions, bread, cheese, salted pork, kicked into the mud by panicked horses. He signals to a lone squire, and soon a makeshift trench forms to shield the wounded. You duck into hand bandages, linen strips, stained crimson wrapping a lad's arm while whispering, "Hold tight, friend." His hand grips yours like a lifeline, knuckles white against the blood. You glance at Warwick's back, engraved with the motto, Dieu et mandroit, and feel a shiver. The divine and personal rites clash here in gruesome perfection as the battle's crescendo peaks. Yorkist longbowmen on a ridge find their mark, sending Lancastrian pikemen stumbling. You look up to see the archers kneeling in disciplined rows, their breath puffing as they draw and release in one fluid motion. Medieval firing squad that turns snowflakes red. A jape tugs at your lips. Imagine calling this a group bow instead of group chat. You almost tweeted in your mind. By mid-afternoon, the Yorkist left flank crumbles, then reforms under Edward IV's command, who rides forward with a captured Lancastrian helm strapped to his saddle. You steady yourself against a felled oak as he leads a countercharge that divides the field like a knife through buttercream. Snow churns around his steed's hooves. His velvet surcoat glints blood red, making him appear more apparition than man. Some say he paused mid-path to tie a shoelace, unlikely, but a quirky rumor that highlights how even kings can fumble laces under pressure. The final onslaught arrives in a whirl of steel and wind. Men weep, shout, and slither through mud, half drawn by hope, half pushed by desperation. You hear the odd exchange, "Hand over your shield, or I'll post your front page," a jokey threat modernized by centuries. Yet the stakes couldn't be higher. Historians still argue whether Toten's outcome was secured by sheer numbers or the Yorkists' superior tactics. But contemporary witnesses agree on one point. It felt like the end of the world, when dusk finally drapes the field. The snow-smothered bodies glitter under a pale moon as if lined with frost-forged jewels. You wander among the fallen, retrieving stray letters, splintered crosses, and broken lances, keepsakes of a world undone. A Yorkist halberd lies embedded in an icy stump. You tug it free and feel the weight of history in your palm. The curve of the blade, whispering remember. You pause by a frozen brook where survivors huddle, our breath hanging like ghosts. A Yorkist veteran offers you a chunk of barley cake, crumbs clinging to frost-tipped beard hairs. You burn the morsel in your mouth, tasting grit and necessity more than sweetness. It's a reminder that life persists. However battered as you survey the devastated panorama, you recall the skeletal silence of Wakefield. Henry's vacant throne, and Neville and Percy's petty feud, magnified beyond imagination. Now at Toten, the war's fury roars at its zenith. You shiver, not just from cold, but from the knowledge that the scales of this conflict have tipped irreversibly. The White Rose stands triumphant here, but what cost? You press a hand to your chest, feeling the ache of too many hearts stilled. Too many tomorrows stolen. You trudge toward the south, where torches mark makeshift hospitals and whispered prayers rise like smoke toward a merciless sky. Each step crunches, echoes, and sings a dirge for the kingdom's lost sons. You linger at the edge of the field, watching dawn's first light catch on blood-spattered snow, and realize that England will never be the same. Yet somewhere in that frozen hush lies the seed of renewal, harder than steel, more enduring than frost. You slip through the heavy oak doors of Westminster Abbey. It's the scent of incense and damp stone swirling around you like a velvet cloak. Can't catch your breath as Edward of York steps forward. His polished cuirass gleams in the soft torchlight, reflecting a sea of anxious faces. Behind him, the high almoner presents the ancient St. Edward's crown, its gold filigree glinting with embedded emeralds and pearls, as if daring anyone to question its wearer. The hush feels like the breath before a plunge, and you realize you're about to witness a crown literally stolen, seized by a man whose victory at Totan carved the path. On June 28, 1461, in one of history's speediest coronations, Edward unfurls his white velvet mantle and grips the scepter, crowning himself before Parliament's assembled peers. It's a mainstream fact that this swift ceremony solidified his claim after that brutal Toten debacle, effectively relegating Henry VI to an obscure footnote, at least until his ghostly rumors surfaced. You sense the shockwaves ripple through the chamber, noble women clutch jeweled handkerchiefs, and barons' whispers ricochet like tennis balls in a marble hall. The abbey's pillars absorb murmurs of "Long live King Edward," while you feel the chill of the stone floor through your thin-soled boots, 'cause clearly medieval strength training included endurance to frostbite. A monk behind you coughs into a rusted chalice, sending a fine spray of droplets ringing like tiny bells. You smirk. If medieval hygiene taught us anything, it's that shared goblets were the original social. It's network viral in every sense. As the Archbishop places the crown on Edward's head, the weight presses down with a subtle groan. Oak beams above, seeming to lean in. You almost hear Henry VI's absent heartbeat echoing in the rafters. Historians still argue whether Edward's rapid coronation was a masterstroke of realpolitik or an extra-legal grab that set a dangerous precedent. Was it inviolable tradition or outright heist? The debate seems as lively as any modern talk. Show panel, a fringe tidbit drifts through the crowd. Some say Edward slipped a small ring, carved from the rotted oak of the battlefield at Wakefield, into the crown's line, in omen. He'd literally hidden his enemies' graves in his regalia. Probably tavern lore, but you can't deny the chill that slithers down your spine at the thought of bone dust seasoning royal gold dot below the dais. A Yorkist yeoman waves a pennon festooned with a yew-wood arrow dipped in red dye, his personal blazon marking the color of fresh conquest. You edge closer, inhaling the scent of smoldering wicks and hot wax dripping onto flagstone. It feels less sacred and more like a rock concert. Torches flicker like pyrotechnics. Horns blare in muted triumph, and someone's trumpeter valiantly tries to hit a high note, only to squeak like a startled squirrel outside the midday sun. Beats down on Parliament Square, where a sea of commoners jostle for a glimpse of their new king. Wind whips Edward's ermine-trimmed cloak around his shoulders, swelling it like a royal sail. You step into the courtyard and feel the roar of the crowd vibrating through your boots. Someone yells, "Did you see his embroidered socks?" Cheeky reminder that fashion was the 15th century version of trolling your rivals on Instagram. You follow Edward down corridors to the Jewel Tower, where the regalia is meant to be secured. Instead, you find the vault empty, save for a velvet cushion that once cradled Henry VI's crown. It lies abandoned, as forgotten as last week's trends, while Edward's new circlet occupies its throne. Scholars still argue whether the Lancastrian jewels, especially the famed desert diamond pummel, were spirited away by Yorkist loyalists or sold off in panic. Regardless, seeing that cushion sends a peculiar jolt. The symbol of legitimate kingship lies bereft on purple velvet. A quirky rumor circulates that Edward didn't even use the official gold rod of justice at his coronation. Instead, he brandished a converted halberd tipped with a silver finial, commandeered from a captured Lancastrian captain. Fringe chroniclers claim the rod-wielding officer fainted at the sight, convinced he'd been desecrated by sacrilege. You can't help but imagine it, a knight swooning as the weapon of justice turned. War Trophy. As you step onto the snowy terraces overlooking the Thames, the breeze carries the scent of winter-frozen yew and wood smoke. Edward pauses to peer down at the river's slate-gray flow, his gloved hand brushing a strand of russet hair from his brow. You taste the cold on your tongue sharp, bracing like gulping ambitious speech at a builder's meeting. He seems serene, almost unreadable, as if calculating each pulse of the crowd below. A herald unfurls a parchment in the courtyard, reading out Edward's first proclamation, an amnesty for all who fought under York's banner, provided they swear fealty by midsummer's feast. The words drift through the chill air, landing on chilly ears. Some Lancastrian sympathizers mutter that this decree is hollow like offering a band-aid for a severed limb. Others whisper that the proclamation's ink was mixed with ground unicorn horn, a fringe belief in magically binding vows. You catch sight of John Neville, the new Earl of Northumberland, pacing near the battlements with his pet polecat trotting at his heel. Rumor has it Neville trained the creature to sniff out traitors in dark corridors, an early medieval covert ops unit, if you will. You grin at the thought of a fluffy spy discarding corned beef sandwiches to reveal conspirators inside the palace. Edward slips away to his private Solara snug chamber, warmed by a brazier. Velvet tapestries insulate the walls, each embroidered rose shimmering in the firelight. You sink onto a first-strewn bench, listening to the crackle of embers and the distant clank of armored sentries. A cupbearer pours spiced wine scented with cinnamon and citrus peel, a luxury imported from the Mediterranean that you can almost taste. It's the flavor of victory, you think, with a hint of dubious debt. At the stroke of dusk, the palace bells toll, marking the moment Edward officially claims all royal prerogatives. A hush falls across London, as if the city itself inhales, uncertain of its next exhale. You stand at a window, gazing out at lantern-lit streets where shadows dance like whispered rumors. The stolen crown is heavy, not just on Edward's brow, but on the realm's future. Every clasp and chain signals that the old order has fractured. You wander back to Westminster's cloisters, tracing your fingers along carved stone grotesques, each one a silent witness to this theft. You press your palm to a grotesque's weathered face, feeling the century's patina, and realize that history's gravest moments often hinge on a single act. A crown lifted, a promise broken, a legacy rewritten. As night descends, you hear a lone fox barking in the distance and imagine it cursing the new king in animal tongue. You tuck your cloak tighter, the wind slipping through the abbey doors like a ring of dissonant notes. Edward IV's stolen crown gleams above, dazzling as a beacon and ominous as a guillotine's blade. You inhale the chill, taste the future's uncertainty, and wonder which heirs, legitimate or otherwise, will rise next to claim the legacy he's seized. You tread board planks slick with sea spray, the salty tang whipping your nostrils as Margaret of Anjou's hastily assembled flotilla creaks through the channel like a coffin full of secrets. The deck sways beneath your boots, each wave's embrace jolting you against the mast as you watch the Queen climb the quarterdeck, her crimson cloak flapping like a battered banner in a storm. Behind her, Lancastrian refugees huddle beneath threadbare cloaks, clutching purses stuffed with Florentine florins and soggy dispatches predicting Edward's every move. No retweets required. You follow her across churning waters to Harfleur, landing on pebbled shores where the cry of gulls and the groan of masts mingle into a symphony of desperation. It's a mainstream fact that after Edward IV's coronation in June 1461, Margaret sought refuge in Burgundy and then France, securing King Louis XI's reluctant support before raising fresh troops to reclaim her husband's throne. Historians still argue whether her diplomatic charm or sheer obstinacy proved more effective in swaying the French court to bankroll her cause. The air on French soil hits your face like a cold hand laced with the scent of damp earth and horse sweat from newly mustered cavalry. You trudge through muddy camp tents where grooms oil, clattering harnesses, and the steady clip-clop of hooves hits the wet grass. Beside you, a lean knight named Sir John Fortescue quips that the only thing wetter than the ground is Margaret's mood, though he may have been talking about his own tunic. You resist a grin, remembering how we joked last winter about York's midday nap mandate. These trenches feel like sieges staged on insomniac terms. In Rouen, you witness Margaret pacing the courtyard of the Archbishop's palace, her ivory gloves stained with grape juice from hurried negotiations. She presses a parchment treaty into the cardinal's hands, her voice lilting like a lullaby yet sharp enough to cut through obsequious prayers. Fringe rumors swirl that she smuggled this parchment inside a hollowed-out rosary carved from red deer antler, believing it would protect the document from prying Lancastrian eyes, whether truth or taverner's fancy. The image of her whispering secrets to carved beads lingers in your mind as word of her arrival spreads. You slip into a makeshift council huddled beneath the palace's vaulted arcade, hearing Breton mercenaries argue with Gascon archers over pay rates and preferred battle hymns. One Belgian crossbowman complains that his bolts keep skidding off French armor like buttered knives. It's a reminder that alliances in civil war are as slippery as wet pig. Svat no substitute for steadfast loyalty. Margaret's entourage includes a handful of English noblewomen forced into exile. You notice Lady Alice Montague patting a small velvet pouch at her belt, whispering to her companion, "For luck." My mother handed me Parisian soil at birth, foundations of a monarch in mere dust. The idea feels oddly apt, a regal gardening project meant to ensure her offspring's birthright. Though you can't help picturing a queenly potting bench, amid diplomatic parley and saber sharpening, you glimpse the darker side of exile. Squires, once pampered, now haul oil for lanterns or wake at dawn to carry buckets of river water for camp kitchens. One ribald marcher jokes that if chivalry were measured in sweat, the Yorkists would have run out of steam years ago. Underfoot, thick barley porridge simmers in cauldrons, its weedy aroma mingling with the brine. You taste a spoonful, gritty, half-cold, but more filling than any promise of royal favor. By late summer, Margaret parades her new army through Rouen narrow streets, banners of red rose flying beside the French fleur-de-lis. Townsfolk peek from shuttered windows, dropping coins into hastily erected collection boxes to fund the cause. You catch the faint tinkle of a guinea dropping into Wouda, sound as decisive as any trumpet blast in rallying support. Yet some locals caution that the money pays for mercenaries more interested in pillage than principle. Historians still argue whether these foreign troops strengthened Lancastrian resolve or sowed the seeds of distrust that later fractured Margaret's coalition. You press on to Calais. It's the last English-held stronghold, crossing fields where hastily dug trenches gurgle with runoff from recent rains. A picket guard in a faded Yorkist jerkin challenges your approach with a volley of pricks from his pike, eyeing Margaret's party like a farmer spotting a stray calf. The prickles in the air cut through any false bravado. This place feels like a caged beast, inside Calais' stout walls. The harbor bristles with ships waiting to ferry soldiers to English shores. You sense that this city, once a bustling trade hub, feels more like a fortress prison, its merchants torn between wool exports and fear of reprisal. A merchant captain complains to Margaret that the harbor's merchants are all washed up, lest she can guarantee safe passage for their cargo. You stifle a laugh there, pun, awkward yet fitting. It's like someone posting a dad joke on parchment. At midnight, under a slivered moon, Margaret's fleet slips out of harbor. The oars dip like synchronized swimmers in pitch-black water, each stroke drawing you closer to England's battered coastline. You cling to the rail, tasting the metallic temps of salt and the acrid smoke from distant signal fires lit by Lancastrian sympathizers. The wind carries murmurings. Some say Edward's spies intercepted dispatches. Others claim a ghost ship follows in their wacken omen of doom. As dawn pinks the horizon, you glimpse the white cliffs of Dover cresting above choppy waves. You hold your breath, wondering whether the town's sentries will hoist white rose flags or lower them in deference to the returning queen. A fringe account insists that Margaret commissioned a ship cloaked entirely in red sails, hoping to blend with sunrise and evade Yorkist lookout Saroo's part illusion, part maritime graffiti. You touch Dover's chalky shore, the pebbles crunching. Underfoot, like brittle bones, refugees pour into the town. Mothers cradle babes wrapped in torn Lincoln green, their cheeks streaked with tears and cider stains. You guide Margaret through narrow lanes where thatched roofs sag under winters. Memory and lavender spills from window boxes, unintended callback to Henry VI's ginger bath sachets in the painted chamber. The scents intertwine, stale ale, bruised herbs, and the faint sweetness of hope in Canterbury's cathedral precinct. Margaret pauses beneath stained glass martyrs, their halos throwing fractured light across her determined face. She kneels before the high altar, whispering prayers that echo against vaulted stone, each syllable a plea for divine vengeance or mercy depending on who recounts the tale. Some choristers claim they heard her recite a French love poem to her unborn son, whether out of maternal devotion or coded. Strategy remains a point of scholarly debate. You trudge back through the cobbled streets as trumpets announce her presence, half expecting a red carpet but finding only scorched faggots left over from local bonfires. Children dart from doorways, offering daisies in tribute. And you can almost taste their excitement bright as the winter sun reflecting off Wakefield's frozen fields. Yet beneath the surface, anxiety quivers like a wounded hare. By late September, Margaret's force swells to several thousand, dozens of French knights pledging cross and lance to her cause. She camps on Bosom's windswept marshes, where the smell of salt marsh and rotting eel traps veers between tranquility and decay. You lie under a flaxen blanket, listening to the distant bleat of sheep, recalling the hush before Wakefield's ambush. The memory tugs at your spine like frost creeping up a window pane. At dawn's gray edge, horns blare, her advance toward London's outskirts a gauntlet thrown at Edward's feet. Lanterns light the river's face, flickering like half-forgotten prayers. You stand beside Margaret's standard-bearer, banners snapping in a gale that feels almost punitive, as if the elements themselves judge her. You stretch frost-numbed fingers around a tasseled rope, feeling every thread like a tether to hope and fear entwined. On the march south, gossip travels faster than cavalry. Rumors that her flagship carried a gilded shrine to St. Anne, her patroness of childbirth, hoping to bless her unborn heir's legitimacy. Fringe whispers speak of a midwife smuggled in a water barrel to usher the child into the world at sea. Medicine or myth, it spotlights the lengths she go as you trudge forward. The thrum of hooves and jingle of spurs grows nearer to the Thames, where you know Edward's ships patrol the river mouth. You taste on your tongue the metallic temps of uncertainty, like licking a coin in hopes it pays your future. You let your fingers brush the hilt of your dagger, its curve echoing the coastline's bend, and steel yourself for the moment when flight yields to stand or fall. In Margaret's wake, you leave footprints in mud and memory on exile's path, leading back to war-torn England, where hope and vengeance wait hand in glove. You slip through the iron-studded gates of the Tower Green just as dawn's silver light washes over the Thames, and feel the hush of London under Edward IV's rule, a calm so brittle it snaps at the slightest breeze. The city's streets are slick with horse sweat and pulled cobblestones, the markets rattling with gossip instead of swords. For the first time in years, you taste something other than blood and fear. The tang of roasted chestnuts mingled with the sweet smoke of burning pine logs. A scent so inviting you almost forget you're a spectator to history's next act. Edward's peace is deliberate. He revives the old laws against private retainers, insisting that no lord may muster more than 50 men without royal license. It's a mainstream fact that in 1462 he issued the Statute of Liveries to curb the noble private armies that turned every county into a powder keg. On the streets, sheriffs mount patrols in matching red and white tabards, like a uniformed flash mob, ensuring everyone remembers who holds the remote. You watch a pair of sergeants march past a quacking duck market, half expecting them to check the file for concealed weapons, yet beneath the surface, rivalries simmer as fiercely as before. The Nevilles, once the kingmakers, feel sidelined by Edward's new favorites. Richard Neville, Earl of Salisbury's nephew, broods in Middleham, painting miniature white roses on fence posts. Quirky flourish, he claims wards off misfortune. Though villagers grumble that he's basically medieval graffitiing, Percy retainers, meanwhile, still nurse their grudges over Wakefield, whispering that the Yorkists' white roses are destined to wilt on the scaffold. Historians still argue whether Edward's ban on private retainers truly eased tensions or simply forced lords to scheme in more shadowy corners. You breeze into the courtyard of the newly refurbished Bridewell Palace, where turrets gleam with fresh whitewash and glazed windows reflect a hopeful sky. Edward strides through with Elizabeth Woodville at his elbow, her red gold hair catching every beam like a living filament. He's crowned her queen in secret in 1464, a clandestine wedding that sent courtiers spinning like a badly coded social media algorithm. A fringe tidbit insists Elizabeth retained a personal laundress who dipped her undergarments in tincture of aconite to ward off gossip, proof that medieval fashion came with its own DIY hazard warnings. The court's gossipers compare Elizabeth to a reality TV star crashing an exclusive gala. You overhear one duchess mutter that the Woodvilles arrived with more siblings than a TikTok family challenge. Elizabeth's brothers now stride into halls, chanting the Woodville name like a battle cry, earning snorts from old nobles who remember a time when commoners stuck to buying groceries, not dukedoms. You can't help but smirk at the image of a peasant family photoshopped into the aristocracy. But then you recall the Bodleian Library's manuscript margins, scribbled with a caricature of Elizabeth's coiffure, an absurdly tall tower of curls that must have required scaffolding. Still, Edward shows forbearance. He invites old rivals to his feasts, seating Percy and Neville knights at the same table, rejoicing in their awkward attempts at small talk. The hall's long benches creak under the weight of uneasy smiles as cups of claret are filled and refilled. A jester in motley recounts the tale of a Yorkist peasant who tried to smuggle a pint of ale into Parliament, only to be caught by a tabard's velvet trim. "Sorry, good sirs," he quips, "but I mistook your robes for a roadside inn." 3 nobles laugh so hard they nearly knock over the venison. And for a moment, you think peace might actually taste like honeyed mead. Yet not every grievance can be toasting fodder. In Pontefract, The Duchess of York sneaks letters to her brother-in-law, Salisbury's heir, cautioning him against Edward's new Woodville clique. They scribble in cipher, each key buried under layers of flourished script as elaborate as a modern captcha. You trace the curling letters with your finger, wondering if anyone would decode your own grocery list if you doodled enough flourishes. As summer heats the city, the Thames banks fill with barge traffic carrying goods taxed at new royal rates. You step onto a wharf, slick with fish guts and oak planks, inhaling the spicy sour temps. Merchants grumble that Edward's levy on imports is as bearable as wearing wet boots all day. Sure to breed complaints, but not quite enough to spark outright revolt. A port clerk jokes that if Edward taxed sneezes, he'd bankrupt the kingdom 1 HU at a time, and you chuckle. Picturing Parliament passing a sneeze toll ordinance, amid this uneasy calm, you sense the ghosts of past battles peering from every corner. At Middleham Castle, you glimpse the shattered remains of York's old solar, now rebuilt, but still scarred by mortar and blood. Edward himself visits the site, standing in the hall where his father once feasted, feet echoing on rebuilt stones. He brushes his hand over a newly carved rose motif, his expression unreadable. Is he honoring memory or daring any rival to deface it? You lean in to catch his whispered oath, peace through strength. He murmurs, as if reciting a code you've subscribed to without ever opting out in the countryside. Small skirmishes break out as local lords test boundaries. 2 minutes? I go in Kent. A minor squabble over sheep trespass escalated until one retainer's painted shield was knocked askew. The feud culminated in a cluster of unpaid debts, split hooves, and a midnight raid that left body puns echoing through the hedgerows. You nearly laugh if only they'd had a group chat. Maybe the whole mess could have been resolved with a gif and an apology emoji. Despite his reforms, Edward courts fresh drama. He commissions extravagant pageants for St. George's Day, parading knights in gilded harnesses that glint like Snapchat filters, gone gold-plated. One pageant featured a living dragon puppet costing more than a small duchy's annual revenue. And word is, the artisans used real tar beneath its scales so it might steam convincingly. Fringe accounts claim they nearly burned the spectators, along with the metaphorical beast proof that showmanship and war and peace can both scorch the unwary. In late autumn, rumors swirl that Edward will convene Parliament early to prise open noble coffers. You hear whispers that Salisbury's heir plans to propose a new bill limiting Woodville lands. Percy's nod in agreement, thinking any wound to the Woodvilles might heal their own bruised egos. In this swirling tide of rumor and ambition, you taste the electric fizz of anticipation. It's like waiting for the next software update that promises bug fixes but delivers new glitches. One crisp evening, you wander through the palace gardens where fountains still shimmer with enchanted dyes that Edward commissioned after hearing tales of Alexander the Great's jeweled springs. You press a finger to the water's surface, the color shifting from azure to pale rose as it ripples a nod to the Tudor rose that has yet to bloom on the horizon. You shiver, not from the chill, but from the sense that calm is merely the eye of a brewing storm. As moonlight filters through skeletal branches, you recall Margaret of Anjou's march across Baja Marsh and her bannermen stamping mud onto English soil once more. Edward's peace has held, but every treaty's fine print invites renegotiation. You duck under a yew archway, the scent of crushed needles sharp as a Trump's fanfare, and feel your pulse quicken at the thought of old rivalries bristling back to life. You step back onto the palace steps, the torches casting long shadows that stretch like open hands. The quiet years have roared with undercurrents of jealousy, ambition, attain, and forbidden alliances, each ripple threatening to become a tidal wave. You fold your hands against your chest, listening to the distant echo of clanging armor in the yard below. Sounds less like preparation for war and more like a restless mastodon scratch-marking time. In the hush, you taste the future, uncertain, charged and waiting for the moment when these simmering loyalties burst into flame once more. You slip into the rose-laced corridors of Middleham Castle, Warwick's stronghold, feeling the hush of anticipation sharper than any steel blade. Tapestries portray Triumph Salisbury's victories, white roses kneeling beside blue pennants, but you sense tonight a different tale, one of schemes unraveling. Richard Neville, Earl of Warwick, strides past flickering torches, cloaks swirling like storm clouds, plotting a gambit that will shake England's foundations. You trail him, heart pounding, as courtiers scurry to assemble maps, muster banners, and polish trumpets whose brassy notes promise thunder, having crowned Edward IV and forged the Yorkist realm. Warwick chafes beneath his protégé's growing independence and the rise of the Woodvilles. He rages in intimate councils over Edward's secret marriage to Elizabeth Woodville, an alliance that splashes green and white Woodville colors across court instead of Warwick's proud blue and gold. Historians still argue whether Warwick's defection sprang more from wounded pride or genuine policy differences, but the wound aches nevertheless. You almost taste the bitterness as courtiers whisper that the kingmaker feels dethroned by common birth arrogance. In early 1470, you join Warwick as he meets with King Louis XI in Calais, arranged under a hooded lantern's glow. The seas. Brine tang clings to your cloak, and the low roar of surf pounds like distant drums. Warwick unfurls a treaty drafted in Norman French, a pact with Margaret of Anjou to restore Henry vie in exchange for French support and territorial concessions. You catch the scent of damp vellum and spilled incredulent of clandestine pacts, sealed with more ambition than trust. A fringed tale drifts through the council that Warwick's scribe mixed deadly nightshade into the royal ink. Believing it would curse Edward's fortunes when the treaty was read aloud. Whether truth or tavern yarn, it underscores the lengths to which he'll go. You imagine the archbishop recoiling from poisoned manuscripts? Drawing a parallel to modern hack attacks malicious code disguised in harmless text. By October 1470, Warwick's army marches into London, banners of reconciliation snapping like whip cracks over the Thames. You stand on the embankment, inhaling the mingled smells of river mud, horse sweat, and burning pitch from hastily lit signal fires atop London Bridge. Commoners jostle in muddy streets, cheering at Warwick's passing, hurling down roses plucked from garden walls. You taste the sweetness of victory, dancing with the grime of power reclaimed. The puppets shift. Henry VI returns to the Tower, wearing his crown like a weary novice. Warwick gazes upon the deposed Edward IV with a calculating eye like a chess master smirking at a misplaced knight. You watch Warwick clasp the fallen king's shoulder, the gesture as hollow as a retweeted condolence. A mainstream fact. Warwick reinstates Lancastrian loyalists to positions of power and orders the arrest of Woodville partisans, cleansing the court of perceived usurpers. Yet cracks form in Warwick's grand edifice. Word filters that French gold, meant to pay troops, has been delayed, leaving foot soldiers unpaid and muttering among themselves. You slip into the lodgings behind camp walls, where Yorkist prisoners swap stories of lavish Yorkist pay against Lancastrian penny pinching. One disgruntled pikeman mutters that eating meager rations while cradling a king is akin to balancing your bank account on the back of someone else's card, purely unsustainable, as spring 1471 dawns. Rumors surge like tidal waves. Edward IV has escaped from Burgundy and rallying loyalists in the north. You feel the tension coiling through Warwick's camp like a rattlesnake ready to strike. The Earl urges you to ride south with dispatches, urging all loyal nobles to converge at Coventry. You grip the reins, leather cracking under frost, and stomach knots as you gallop toward the fate he has set in motion. You arrive at Coventry's gates, dusty banners snapping above hoofbeats. Inside the courtyard, Warwick convenes a war council beneath a great oak. Wax candles, gutter, and war horns lie coiled on a trestle table. He paces before a map pinned with pins marking Lancastrian and Yorkist strongholds etch-colored pin, like a blood droplet on goatskin parchment. You lean closer, catching the scent of tallow and sweat-laced robes, and he outlines his plan: to meet Edward at Barnet in Hertfordshire. Strike before the Yorkist king can muster full strength, then march on London in triumph. A quirky detail surfaces. Warwick reportedly kept a favorite pet ferret named Falcon that accompanied him on these rides. Its sleek form tucked in his pouch to hunt rabbits along the road, an odd emblem of humble origins amid noble ambition. You shiver imagining a sleek creature nosing at nights. Heels as they strategize campaigns. You trudge through rain-slick lanes the night before Barnet. The sky a bruised purple as thunder echoes overhead. Campfires flicker like ghostly sentinels, and you note war-weary men huddled in blankets, sharpening blades with exhausted fervor. A fringe rumor says local hermits prophesied Warwick's downfall if he crossed those moors at twilight under an easterly wind. You shrug it off as superstition. But a shiver snakes up your spine. Nomans matter when the margin between victory and slaughter is as thin as a pike shaft. On April 14th, 1471, dawn breaks, cold and drear. You trample through dew-soaked grass toward Barnet's Ridge, spotting Warwick's blue banner threaded with gold, fleur-de-lis gift of the French crown. Beyond, Edward's white rose and sun in splendor standard flicker in the mist. Each banner seems to pulse, as though bristling with withheld wrath. Warwick dispatches his vanguard, urging swift preemptive strikes, but miscommunication and shifting wind blurs trumpet signals. You skid in wetter-than-usual turf, hearing orders shouted and then swallowed by the valley's gloom. A Yorkist scout mistakes Montague's men for Warwick's, sowing chaos in the early exchanges. You feel panic bloom, like frostbite so sudden. And searing, steel clashes, horses neigh in panic, and you duck behind a shattered hedge as arrows arc like dark tears. You taste grit on your tongue as mud flicks your face. Warwick appears astride a massive destrier, armor spangled with rain droplets, hair plastered to his brow. He cuts through Yorkist lines with furious skillia. You notice his flank fading. Montague's misaligned troops stand idle, unsure whether to engage friend or foe. Historians still argue whether Warwick's downfall at Barnet was sealed by Edward's cunning or Montague's missteps born of fatigue and confusion. You sprint toward Warwick. It's calling his name, but he's locked in destiny's vice. A hail of arrows descends. One embeds itself in his shoulder, another in his thigh. You hear him curse like a common sailor, then rally his retinue, screaming, "To me, comrades." His voice booms even as his strength wanes. A fringe account says Warwick once donned enchanted gloves, stitched with hair from the Bayeux tapestry, believing them to grant invincibility. You scowl at the KitchenAid-level absurdity. No woven charm can outmatch a well-directed arrow, yet you can't dismiss how superstition and sorrow mingle on battlefields. You reach Warwick's side as he staggers, its blood seeping through his crimson surcoat. His armor rattles like a dying bell. He grips your arm, eyes flickering with defiance. "Press on," he rasps, voice like gravel. You want to swear fealty anew, but the battle's roar deafens you. He slumps, sword clattering to turf, and you catch the metallic twang as it lands, a requiem for the kingmaker himself, as you kneel. Dragging a cloak beneath him, you sense the wind shift. The Yorkist left flank surges forward under Edward's command. his armor gleaming with cold purpose. The Lancastrian charge falters, retinues scatter, and the ridge falls silent, save for gasps and the groans of wounded men. You gather. Warwick's head in your lap. Legend says he whispered one last boast about reclaiming power, and no one can confirm his final words. You press a hand to his chest, feeling absence more than heartbeat. The field's blue blooms dim as the victor's flags ascend. Night descends on Barnet with a sullen hush. Latine. Smoke drifts, mingling with chakra-light torchlight. You rise, brushing mud from your hands, and gaze at the fallen kingmaker's standard hanging limp like a tattered promise. You wonder if any plan merits the price paid here, a noble life lost to folly, alliances sundered, dreams shattered in a single dawn's light. You trudge away from the ridge, Warwick's legacy heavy in your pack, each step echoing with regret and reluctant relief. The folly of Warwick, the grand architect of crowns, has collapsed under its own weight, leaving England's war to resume its savage spin. You clutch the reins as the Thames mist coils around your cloak like a whispering serpent, and feel the river's pulse matching your own ebbing, surging, never still. After Barnet, Edward IV's hold on the throne feels both ironclad and imperiled, as if every barge that glides beneath London Bridge carries the weight of his fate. You watch the king's flagship cut through pale water, banners snapping overhead, and sense that each crossing of the Thames signals a turn in fortune's wheel. In October 1471, Edward returns triumphant from exile in Burgundy, a mainstream fact that cements his second reign. Having fled the chaos of Henry's brief restoration, he slipped across Calais under moonless skies, landing in Ravensbourne with only a handful of loyal retainers. Now he steers his barge toward the Tower, the morning sun glinting off his polished helm. Historians still argue whether his swift comeback owed more to foreign alliances or to the fragility of Lancastrian loyalty, but either way, the spectacle of his return feels staged for maximum effect, as choreographed as a courtly masque. You step ashore at the Tower Wharf, the river's temps mingling with the clatter of hooves on quayside stones. A fringe rumor drifts through the crowd that Edward brought with him a small sealed box containing soil from Wakefield's blood-soaked fields, intending to sprinkle it at Westminster as homage to the fallen and warning to the living. Whether he truly performed this ritual or it's a tavern tale remains hotly debated. But you picture him leveling a handful of earth at the foot of St. Peter's Chapel, Quillpart's piety and psychological warfare, as the procession winds through narrow lanes strewn with autumn leaves. You catch glimpses of Londoners craning for a better view. A merchant hands out silver pennies stamped with Edward's profile, hoping the new coinage will replace Lancastrian groats and curry favor. You bite the coin's edge, an instinctive check for silver purity that feels oddly modern and taste. The metallic temps of renewed allegiance. At Whitehall's courtyard, Edward dismounts and strides to a makeshift dais. He bows to cheers that swell like tides, raising a gauntlet hand in greeting. His surcoat of crimson velvet and ermine seems to swallow torchlight, and you can almost feel the warmth radiating from his presence. Yet beneath the fanfare lies unease. Old Yorkist lords whisper that new favorites, the Woodvilles, flourish like mushrooms overnight, sprouting titles and lands at Edward's behest. Displaced nobles mutter that loyalty once repaid in gold is prone to wither without fresh dividends. You wander to Westminster Abbey, where Edward prays for his fallen rival's act of magnanimity etched into official chronicles. He lays a wreath of white roses before Henry V's tomb, a gesture recorded in stone rather than ink. A quirky aside notes that the wreath was tied with a ribbon dyed using ground cochineal from Spanish America. Vibrant red contraband so prized that it sparked smuggling rings. You inhale the faint sweetness of that ribbon in your mind, marveling at how colonial threads weave into English power plays. Meanwhile, across the channel, Margaret of Anjou flits between Paris and Angers, rallying her last supporters. You sense her resolve in the hush of French courts, her presence a scar upon Lancastrian hopes. In May 1471, she lands once more at Sandwich, only to find the ports sealed and Edward's ships patrolling every channel. Her final gambit ends at Tewkesbury, where her son, Edward of Lancaster, marches wearing his father's ceded arms up. The fact that underscores her maternal bravery and political desperation. On May 4th, near the Avon's muddy banks, the Lancastrian army forms ranks to intercept Edward. You trudge through tremulous hedgerows toward the battlefield. The scent of hawthorn mingling with the smoke of rising bonfires. A local cleric notes that he blessed the fields with holy water drawn from the Avon itself. Fringe belief that rivers consecrated in life could sanctify corpses in death. Historians still argue whether such superstitious rites swayed soldiers' courage or merely warmed chilly hearts. At dawn, both forces collide under thunderous skies. You press into the Yorkist front line. Hoisting a longbow loaded with flame-etched arrows, an innovation rumored to frighten horses into bolting. As you knock your shaft, rain slicks the fletching, each release hissing like steam from a kettle. Knights in plate rush past, halberds swinging in arcs of silver. You taste grit on your tongue, clay churned by hoofs, and swallow against the adrenaline knotting your throat. The melee is brief but decisive. Edward himself leads a cavalry charge through desultory Lancastrian pikemen, slicing their lines like shears through silk. You nearly laugh at one contingent that panicked and scattered. Banners collapsing like loose sails in a dead calm. When you spot Margaret in the distance, clad in black velvet and clutching a rosary, her face pale as bone. You feel both awe and pity. As the sun breaks through clouds, Tewkesbury's fate is sealed. A fringe legend insists that a hawk, trained by Warwick, swooped low and screamed over Yorkist heads, seen as an omen of victory. Whether it belonged to Warwick's ferret-toting retinue, or was simply a stray falcon, remains murky. Either way, the sight, or the story, lent courage to York's ranks. In the aftermath, you wander among Lancastrian captives. Edward grants many pardons, but high-born prisoners like the Duke of Somerset and the Earl of Devon meet grim ends on London's Tower Hiller wholesale purge that cements Yorkist dominance. You watch barrels of salt used to cleanse their estates, a mainstream fact that underscores how property politics accompanied each execution. The salted earth ensures no family heir can reclaim lands, a strategy so ruthless it rivals modern asset. Freezes. Back at the tower, Edward gazes upon Margaret, bound in chains, her hair tumbled and gown torn, yet bearing a queen's dignity. He offers her safe passage to France in return for exile, a gesture recorded with both sincerity and cunning. Go, he whispers, but leave your thorns behind. Whether his mercy stems from genuine clemency or fear of the ghost she might become is an open question historians still debate. You escort Margaret to a barge at dusk. The river's eddies swirling as if reluctant to relinquish her. A sailor passes around a flask of spiced wine. She accepts a sip, amber light catching her tears. You feel the ache of her departure. A final echo of Lancastrian resistance fading into the Channel's embrace. As night falls, you stand on Blackfriars Bridge, river winds, licking at your cheeks like forgiving tongues. You watch city lanterns blossom across London's sprawl, each one a hearth rekindled after Civil War's storm. Yet beneath that glow, you sense undercurrent-souled grievances pressed into hidden vaults, loyalties traded for gold, debts salted into the earth, waiting to resurface. You step away from the rail, hearing the distant clank of a barge chain. In the hush, you catch that the tides of fortune have shifted again, this time in Edward's favor. But waters remain restless, currents swirling with memory and ambition. The Game of Thrones plays on, reshaped but never settled. And you taste both victory's sweetness and the salt of unhealed wounds. You trudge across Bosworth's rolling fields before dawn, the damp earth squelching beneath your boots like a stubborn apology, and feel the August air thick with humidity and tension, almost as if the sky itself hesitates to unleash its heat. Ahead, King Richard III's white boar standard and Henry Tudor's red dragon banner stand like rivals in a medieval esports final. Banners snapping in the breeze as sun-saluted stakes rise with every heartbeat. On August 22nd, 1485, these armies collide in a battle that will end the Plantagenet dynasty and birth the Tudor age, a mainstream fact that crowns Bosworth as the war's final, decisive clash. Historians still argue whether Richard's bold cavalry charge aimed at Henry directly was a stroke of genius or a fatal misread of the terrain. But either way, the ground he chooses foreshadows how a single moment can tilt the realm. You skirt around a hedgerow where horses nick at brambles, spinning clouds of sweat-scented flies. The smell of leather and horseflesh mingles with dew-soaked grass, and you almost choke on a whiff of charred tinder from last night's skirmish. A stray pig wanders through camp, snuffling at abandoned kettles. A quirky fringe whisper claims Henry smuggled a sow from Pembroke Castle entourage as a good luck token, believing its snorts could ward off arrows. Whether hog or charm, the image lingers like an ancient meme in the center. Knights gird for combat. Richard's men shine plate armor until it glares like a disco ball, while Tudor's Welsh archers test longbows carved from you, a callback to the arrows you saw at Death of Somerset's feast. You recall those golden-fletched Yorkist bolts and note how these shepherds turned warriors string bowstrings with a farmer's practiced grace. Draw a silent vow. A jolt runs through Richard's host as the heart of his forces aligns behind his flagship, the white boar crest atop a gilded helm. It glistens in the morning light like a misplaced bathroom ornament. You imagine a knight carelessly raw-snap chatting it to a buddy before the charge of social media had existed. Richard's boar might have trended #brutalbeast. Yet, whether intimidation or vanity, the boar looms over the field like a promise and a warning. Richard spurs his destrier forward, his trumpet fanfare echoing off distant oaks. You clutch the hilt of your blade, nostrils flaring at the acrid tang of powder from handgunner pioneers' early hand cannons that roar like angered lions. A melee erupts as pikemen lock shields, spears clattering in a staccato drumroll. You duck under a swirling mace, feeling its momentum gust past like a faulty drone rotor. Meanwhile, its left flank navigates muddy ruts that glisten in the sun, each step sucking at your boots like a clingy Tinder date. Welsh archers rain arrows into Richard's ranks. Each thunk a percussive punctuation that brings to mind modern FPS headshots. You grin at the thought of lag on a medieval battlefield. Wind delay could mean an arrow hits your patchouli. Candles at home instead of the enemy. As Richard approaches Henry's center, betrayal blooms near a cluster of trees. You spot Lord Stanley's banner, the horses under its gold-laced harness shifting uneasily. Rumors swirl. Some say Stanley stood idle because he awaited payment. Others insist a secret promise of a dukedom sealed his neutrality. A fringe anecdote even claims Stanley's squires tied a white piglet to his lance as a sign of pending squeal. An agricultural code for treachery that probably confused more than conveyed. Undeterred, Richard plunges into the fray, voice thunderous. A horse, my kingdom for a horse. Historians still argue whether that cry was genuine desperation or later invention by Tudor chroniclers to dramatize. Richard's fall. You feel adrenaline prick your skin as you press steel against steel, struck by how a monarch's personal gamble can ripple through every shield bash and bruised limb. Around you, horses rear. Hooves churn muck into plumes of cloying mist, and the clangor of arms crescendos like a raucous choir gone mad. A Yorkist knight tumbles off his mount, getting entangled in his own banner, a comedic spectacle, if not for the gravity of the moment. Stifle a laugh, picturing him making a tutorial on how not to display your colors. But then, the battlefield seriousness snaps you back. Richard's charge splits Henry's line, and you surge forward, blades gleaming. You parry an axe overhead, feeling its heft like a misguided think-piece impressive concept, catastrophic execution. Sweat beads on your brow as you thrust, steel grazing flesh. A reminder that civil war tastes like rust and raw edges. Suddenly, a trumpet blast cuts through the cacophony, and Henry's men pour in from the flank, cutting off Richard's escape. You turn to see Stanley's men sliding down the ridge like water pouring from a tipped bucket, pikes at the ready. The shock vibrates through your bones. Loyalty's blade can sting sharper than any arrow. Richard, dismounted and encircled, fights on foot with furious determination. You witness him parry a glancing blow, his helm dented like a dented reputation. Then drive an offhand swing that sends an opponent sprawling. Yet the numbers overwhelm. A Lancastrian bill hooks his vambrace, yanking his arm back. You see his lips curl in grim amusement at fate's irony. One final thrust, and he crumples onto blood-slicked turf. You kneel beside him, the stink of iron and sweat overpowering. Richard looks up, helmet half-tilted, breathing harsh, eyes blazing with defiance, even as life ebbs. You bow your head, feeling the weight of a kingdom collapse onto your shoulders. A hush steals over the field. Banners flutter like wounded birds as combatants pause, tasting disbelief in the smoky air. Henry strides forward, red dragon banner unfurling like vindication, and kneels to claim a fallen crown. You watch him place it on his head, the metal biting into his brow, history pivoting on that single moment as the sun climbs. Survivors sift through corpses. You help bind wounds with linen strips torn from banners, a callback to St. Albans bandages mingled with poppy-laced ale folly. The groans of the injured blend with the distant crow of cocks, nature's own subtle encore to man's final violence. In the aftermath, you overhear a fringe story. A local blacksmith claimed Richard's final breath whispered a prophecy of dragons, rising an omen long since mythologized by Tudor poets. Likely fanciful. Yet it cements the legend of Richard III's fall as a turning point that defies mundane explanation. You stand amid broken halberds and abandoned helmets. The ground a tapestry woven of blood and ambition. You taste gratitude on your tongue, grateful you survived, grateful you witnessed the last gasp of Plantagenet rule. Yet beneath that relief lies a tremor. What new storms will Henry's reign unleash? You trudge away from Bosworth's guard. Fields, feeling the sun's heat finally breaking through clouds. Each step echoes on the hollow silence of a war ended and a dynasty erased, as you carry the memory of lost swords and changing banners into England's uncertain dawn. You trudge down the ridge where Bosworth's fields slope gently into the misty vale of the Red Brook. Your boots still slick with blood and dew, and feel the hush of morning wrap around you like a damp blanket. The sun's first light drips through gauzy clouds, painting the world in soft pinks and grays. As you watch Henry Tudor stride forward, crown bare in hand, toward a fate he insists will be different. Behind him, Lancastrian banners lie folded, white roses smudged with mud, while red dragons unfurl on every pitch-pole, a curious nod to the fiery Wales he hails from. You taste the earth's cool breath on your lips and sense the tremor of a new dynasty taking its tentative shape. On October 30th, 1485, you witness Henry's coronation at Westminster Abbey, a mainstream fact that stamps his claim as Henry VII, and sparks cautious hope that civil wars can end in crowns rather than corpses. The air in the abbey feels thick with incense and anxious wonder, like a hush before a concert begins, while Henry sweeps a white, ermine-lined robe over his shoulders, its fur soft as a mother's whisper. You almost fend off the urge to tweet LiveMagine, posting a selfie in your coronation cloak with hashtag #NewKingWhoDs. Yet here, vows are sworn on holy relics, and each oath carries the weight of shattered kingdoms. Historians still argue whether Henry's secret marriage to Elizabeth of York truly united Lancaster and York, or merely papered over deeper fissures destined to crack again. You stand close enough to catch Elizabeth's pale, gloved hand brushing the crown's points, her wedding ring glinting like a tiny new moon under torchlight. Then feel a pang of empathy for her role as living symbol, as if she were a human, treaty-bound in velvet and jewels. It's almost absurd. A queen whose heartbeat steadies the realm's pulse, yet whose own fears flutter like silk in a draught. Outside the abbey's arches, London's streets teem with curious onlookers. You inhale the spicy smoke of toasting chestnuts from street vendors, mingling with the brackish Thames mist and the squeak of wagon wheels on cobbles. A fringed tidbit scurries through the crowd. Some swear Henry carried a small carved dragon's tooth in his personate charm, said to ward off betrayal, though others dismiss it as barmaid gossip. Whether myth or memento, it captures the mood. A king grasping at every talisman he can, hoping magic outweighs mortal ambition. As Henry tours the city in a glittering procession, you note how every guard at Temple Bar wears a freshly dyed Tudor livery, black hand-gold badges pinned like corporate merch to their chests. You can almost hear the lords grumbling that this new brand identity rivals any influencer's hashtag campaign. Children dart through the crowd, eyes wide as they wave paper roses colored by hand, while merchants hawk embroidered badges stamped with a 5-petaled rose, Tudor's own revamp of rival emblems. The medieval equivalent of a rebranded logo. In the weeks that follow, you trudge between inns of court and council chambers, watching Henry deftly repair ravaged finances with the act of resumption, reclaiming crown lands sold off in desperation, a mainstream fact that replenishes the exchequer, and reminds unsettled lords that the treasury's purse strings no longer dangle at their whim. You feel the firmness of each decree, like setting a thermostat after months of broiling, faction-fueled chaos. Yet every edict carries risk. Tightening fiscal coils might starve unrest or spawn fresh conspiracies in shadowed tavern corners. At court, Henry moves with cautious grace, hosting a dinner where Yorkists and Lancastrians are seated alternately, as if mixing oil and water in hopes they'll blend. You perch at a side table, tasting lemon-spiced lamprey jelly, slimy, sweet, and oddly comforting, while courtiers trade nervous smiles. A night jokes that Henry's seating plan reads like a university roommate assignment, forcing sworn enemies into awkward proximity. You laugh softly, remembering the Milford Haven landing where trust was thin as a fencer's blade, late at night. You ascend to the palace roof, where the sky yawns endless above London's lantern glow. You feel Henry's era hinge between global trade's promise and old vendetta's shadows, the city's heartbeat pulsing beneath. A stray breeze carries a distant hymn from St. Paul's, its notes weaving hope and caution in equal measure. You let your fingers brush the cold stone battlements, tasting the future's crisp edge, and wonder whether Henry's measured steps will stitch a lasting peace or merely set the stage for another round of feudal power games. You step back into the corridors where tapestries still whisper of Plantagenet triumphs and tragedies. Each cloth seems to breathe with memory Agincourt's arrows, Wakefield's ambush, Bosworth's last gasp reminders that the past clings to corners like ivy. Yet Henry's cautious smile and Elizabeth's steady presence offer a new pattern to the weave. It's a design meant to hold stronger than frayed loyalties. You swallow a breath, tasting resin and parchment, and feel the promise of a dawn that might finally outlast its storms. The dawn's light softens as you close your eyes, the palace's ancient stones warming beneath the gentle glow. You feel a quiet settling in your bones, like the last notes of a lullaby fading into silence. Outside, the murmur of a distant fountain drips in gentle rhythm. A reminder that time flows steadily, unbothered by crowns and betrayals. In this moment, the court's clamor becomes a faint echo, replaced by a slow breath that fills your chest with calm. You remember the hush at Westminster, the hiss of incensed candles, and the hush that followed Henry's oath and exhale, that whispers of new beginnings. Although the world beyond these walls still teems with jagged loyalties and fragile alliances, you feel a soft reassurance in the knowledge that people crave peace as fiercely as they once craved power. Even the quietest heart can grow roots in hope's soil. Let your thoughts drift like petals on a still pond, releasing the clang of steel and the roar of banners. Imagine the tapestry of history folding itself into a single, gentle thread. Connects every momentary journey from Plantagenet feuds to Tudor promise, now stretching its warmth around you. Feel each stitch whisper safety, each color blending sorrow into soft resolution. Hold on to this hush, this fragile calm, as it settles in the space between heartbeats. Know that tomorrow's sunlight will find you ready, restored by the quiet, and emboldened by the journey's lessons. The roses of York and Lancaster may bloom and fade, but here, in this tranquil sigh, peace lingers like a song still humming in the empty hall. End of script. Sweet dreams.